You already know the Quran is divided into 30 parts. You have heard of Juz Amma. In Ramadan, people read one part a night and finish the whole thing in a month. 30 parts, 30 nights. Simple. And you have almost certainly assumed those 30 parts are like chapters, sections, a table of contents. Part 1 is the first theme, Part 2 is the next theme, and so on down to 30. Reading chunks, organized by content, the way any book divides itself. That is not what they are. Not even close. Here is the thing nobody tells you. The 30 divisions of the Quran routinely slice straight through the middle of a surah, straight through the middle of a sentence about a prophet, straight through the middle of a story, leaving the ending in the next part. 21 of the 30 parts begin in the middle of a chapter, not at the start of one. The people who placed these divisions could have made them line up with the surahs. They deliberately did not. Think about how strange that is for a moment. Every book you have ever owned divides itself at meaningful seams. Chapters end where a thought ends. Parts begin where a new movement begins. The whole point of dividing a book is to divide it where the meaning divides. And here is the most carefully preserved text in human history, memorized letter for letter by millions, and its most famous division system does the opposite. It ignores the seams entirely. It comes down like a blade on a grid, and wherever the grid says cut, it cuts, even if that means severing a story clean in half. Which means the 30 parts are not a table of contents at all. They are something else. Something with a purpose that has nothing to do with theme and everything to do with you and your discipline and the number of days in a month. So here is what we are going to do. First, I am going to show you what a juz actually is and why it exists, which is not the reason you think. Then I am going to prove to you that the divisions are not thematic, using the exact places they cut, and then ask the real question. If the designers knew they were slicing through the middle of stories, why did they accept that? Then we are going to find the hidden logic, which is not about content at all, and I am going to show you the actual map, the real shape of the 30 parts, with numbers. Because when you see the shape, you cannot argue with it. And by the end, you are going to understand that the juz is not a filing system. It is a machine, a pacing engine, built to do one specific thing to the person reading. Stay to the end, because the last part of the Quran, the one every child memorizes first, is the proof of the whole design, and it is hiding a number that should stop you. Here is where we start. With what a juz even is. The word juz simply means a part, a portion, a piece of something. The plural is aja. The Quran is divided into 30 of them, and they are close to equal in length. Not equal by surah, not equal by theme, equal by amount. Roughly the same quantity of text in each one, so that 30 of them stacked together make the whole book in 30 near-identical servings. And this is the first thing to get straight, because most people quietly blur the two. A juz is not a surah, and it is not a group of surahs. The surahs are the real chapters of the Quran, revealed as units, named, with beginnings and endings, that the text itself observes. The juz is a completely separate grid laid over the top of them. The two systems do not line up, and they were never meant to. One is the anatomy of the book, the chapters as they were revealed. The other is a measuring layer added on afterward, and it runs across the anatomy at its own angle, indifferent to where the chapters start and stop. When you keep those two apart in your head, everything that follows snaps into focus. When you confuse them, you get the myth we started with, the idea that the 30 parts are just big chapters. They are not. They are a grid. And notice that word, equal. Equal by amount. That is already telling you something. If you were dividing a book by content, you would not care whether the sections came out the same size. Chapters are not the same length. Themes are not the same length. The only reason you would go out of your way to make 30 parts come out to nearly the same quantity of text is if the quantity itself is the point. If the parts are meant to be consumed at a steady rate. And that is exactly why they exist. The division into 30 is not ancient in the way the surahs are. The surahs and their order come from the time of revelation itself. The 30-part division is a later reading aid, developed by the scholars and reciters for two very practical, very human reasons. The first is memorization. The Quran is the most memorized book in human history. Millions of people, right now, have the entire thing committed to memory, word for word. And you do not memorize a book that size in one undifferentiated block. You break it into manageable, roughly equal portions, and you take them one at a time, and 30 parts of near equal size is a memorization schedule. It turns an impossible mountain into 30 identical steps. And notice how the near equal sizing serves the person memorizing specifically. If the parts were thematic, and therefore wildly uneven, a student memorizing a portion at a time would face a random, unpredictable load, a tiny amount one week, a crushing amount the next. No way to plan, no way to measure progress. Equal portions fix that. Every unit is the same size, so the effort per unit is roughly the same. So a student can say, I do 1 juz a month, or 1 hizb a week, and actually keep that promise, because the units do not lie to them about how much is coming. A memorization plan only works if the steps are even. The 30-part division makes them even. That is not a literary decision. It is a project management decision, made for the human being carrying the load. The second reason is the one you already know. Ramadan. 30 parts. And the month of Ramadan is around 30 nights. And there is a long tradition of reading exactly 1 juz per night, so that on the last night of the month you close the book, having recited the entire Quran, cover to cover, in perfect step with the moon. 1 part, 1 night. The division is a calendar. So already, before we have looked at a single breakpoint, the purpose is visible in the structure. These parts are equal in size because they are meant to be taken at a fixed rate, 1 per day, over 30 days. That is not how you divide a book you want understood by theme. That is how you divide a book you want completed by a deadline. And the 30 parts are not even the finest layer of this system. Each juz is itself cut in half, into a unit called a hizbi, so 30 parts become 60. And each hizb is quartered again, marked at the quarter, the half, and the 3/4 point, which means the whole Quran is laid out on a grid of 240 of these small, even measures, each one marked in the margin of a traditional mushaf with a little ornament, so the reciter can see exactly where each portion ends. Stop and think about what that tells you. Nobody builds a 240-point measuring grid for a book they intend to read by theme. You build a grid that fine for one reason: precise, repeatable pacing, so that a person could commit to half a juz a day and finish in 60 days, or a quarter hizb after each of the 5 daily prayers, and finish in a fixed, countable rhythm. The entire apparatus, 30 down to 60, down to 240, is a system for portioning the text into exact, swallowable amounts, over exact, countable time. It is measured the way you measure doses, not the way you measure chapters. And that is the first clue that the 30 parts are behavioral, not thematic. But you do not have to infer it. You can prove it by looking at where the cuts actually fall. And this is where something most people have never had pointed out to them. Go and open a mushaf to the start of the second juz. You would expect it to begin at the start of a surah, a clean edge, a new chapter. It does not. The second juz begins partway into Surah Al-Baqarah at ayah 142, right in the middle of the surah, in the middle of a passage about the changing of the direction of prayer. The first juz ended mid-Baqarah. The second one picks up mid-Baqarah. The break lands inside the chapter. And it is not a one-time thing. It is the rule. I actually went through all 30 divisions and checked every single starting point, and here is the result, and it is stark. Of the 30 parts, only 8 begin exactly at the start of a new surah. 8. The other 21, after the first, begin in the middle of a chapter. 21 out of 30 cut straight through the body of a surah. Let that number land. More than 2/3 of the divisions of the Quran fall inside a surah rather than between 2 surahs. If these were content sections, that would be insane. Imagine a book whose 30 chapters mostly began halfway through a scene, picking up in the middle of a character's sentence. No editor organizing by meaning would ever do that. And I want to be honest with you about one thing here, because this channel does not do the thing where every pattern gets sold as a secret code. Whether the scholars who fixed the juz boundaries consciously sat down and thought, let us engineer suspense to maximize reader retention, that is not something I can prove to you, and I am not going to pretend the sources say it in those words. What I can prove is the 2 facts that matter, and they are facts, not theories. Fact 1. The divisions are near equal in size. You can measure that. Fact 2. 21 of the 30 land mid-surah, mid-story. You can open a mushaf and count that yourself. Those two facts are not in dispute. And whatever the intention behind them, whether it was deliberate design or the natural consequence of prioritizing equal portions over clean seams, the effect on the reader is identical, and it is real. A system that is equal in size and cuts mid-story behaves like a completion engine, regardless of what was in anyone's mind when they built it. We are reading the behavior of the structure, not claiming to read the minds of the people who set it. Keep that distinction, because it is the difference between this and the nonsense. And it gets sharper, because of what specifically gets cut. These are not landing in dead space. The divisions fall in the middle of the story of Musa, in the middle of extended passages about the earlier prophets, in the middle of legal instruction, so that the first half of a ruling is in one juz, and the completion of it is in the next. The 18th juz begins partway through a chapter. The 19th begins partway through another. The 22nd slices in, at a specific ayah, deep inside its surah. Over and over, the blade comes down inside the living tissue of the text, not at the joints. So we have the makings of a real puzzle. The people who placed these divisions were not careless, and they were not ignorant. These were scholars and reciters who knew this text better than almost anyone in history has known any text. They knew exactly where the surahs began and ended. They knew where the stories were. Making the 30 parts line up with the chapters would have been trivially easy for them. They chose not to. They looked at a division that would slice through the middle of the story of Musa, and they accepted it. Why would anyone do that? Let me give you one specific cut, so you can feel it instead of just hearing the statistic. Take the story of Musa and the righteous man he travels with, the one the scholars identify as Khidr, in Surah Al-Kahf. It is one of the most gripping narratives in the entire Quran. The man does 3 strange things. He damages a boat, and then does something shocking to a boy, and then rebuilds a wall in a town that refused them hospitality. And at each step, Musa objects. And you are told, wait, the explanation is coming. The whole story is built on suspense. You are desperate to know why. Now watch where the 16th juz begins. It does not begin before that story, and it does not begin after it. It begins in the middle of it. The boundary of the 15th and 16th parts falls right inside the sequence, so that a reader doing a juz a night reaches the end of their portion with the strange deeds done and the explanations not yet given, and has to close the book on an unresolved mystery and wait until tomorrow. Sit with how deliberate that is. Of all the places to put a break, the grid drops one into the single most suspenseful narrative in the surah, at close to the worst possible moment for a reader who wants resolution, which is to say the best possible moment for a designer who wants that reader to come back. Nobody organizing by meaning does that. Somebody organizing by behavior does exactly that. So now we have the real puzzle, sharpened. Why would anyone accept cutting a story there? Quick word before we continue, because I need something small from you. If this is already changing how you see those 30 parts, tap that like button right now. It costs you nothing, and it is the entire reason a serious 30-minute breakdown like this reaches the people who want it, instead of losing out to a 30-second clip that never asks the real question. And subscribe, because we are building something here, one piece at a time. We took apart Rama. We took apart Taqwa. We built the ladder of the hereafter. We stood in front of the king with no name. We mapped the hidden order of the whole book. To everyone who keeps showing up for the long ones, thank you. You are why these get made. Now let us answer the question, because the answer is the entire idea. Why would they accept cutting through the middle of a story? Because the thing they were optimizing for was not comprehension of a section, it was completion of a schedule. And those two goals pull in opposite directions. Watch this, because it is the whole design. Suppose you did it the other way. Suppose you divided the Quran into 30 thematic parts, each one a clean, self-contained unit, beginning and ending at natural seams, each one a complete thought. Sounds better, right? Here is what would actually happen. The parts would come out wildly different in length, because meaning does not portion itself evenly. Some would be enormous, and some would be tiny. And a reader on a 30-night schedule would hit a giant thematic section on night 4, fall behind, feel defeated, and quietly give up. The clean thematic division would break the reader. Now look at what the actual division does instead. It ignores the seams. It measures out 30 equal portions by quantity, drops the cuts wherever the quantity runs out, and lets them fall mid-story on purpose. And here is the psychological engine that creates. When your daily portion ends in the middle of the story of Musa, you have not finished anything. The story is not over. You are suspended, mid-narrative, with the resolution sitting at the top of tomorrow's portion. That is not a bug. That is the most powerful completion mechanism ever built into a text. Think about how you feel when a chapter ends cleanly, satisfied, done. It is a natural place to stop and to keep stopping. Maybe you come back tomorrow. Maybe you do not, because the unit is closed. Now think about how you feel when the story cuts off mid-scene. You have to come back. The tension is unresolved. The blade fell in the middle of the sentence, and the only way to release it is to open the book again tomorrow. The mid-surah cut is a cliffhanger, and it was engineered. And it works on the exact same part of the human mind that makes you watch one more episode. The designers accepted slicing through the story because slicing through the story is what brings the reader back. A Jews that ended cleanly every night would be easy to abandon. A Jews that ends mid-story every night is almost impossible to abandon because you are not stopping at an ending, you are stopping at a suspension, and suspensions demand resolution. And there is a second behavioral force stacked on top of the suspension, and it is the one that makes the whole thing addictive in the best sense: completion. The Quran, being finished cover to cover, has its own name, Khatma, a completion, a sealing, and finishing one is treated as a moment of real significance, marked with a special supplication, sometimes with gathering and celebration. So the reader is not only pulled forward night to night by unresolved stories, they are pulled toward a single, named, honored finish line 30 days away. A finish line they can feel getting closer as the parts tick by. 29 down, 1 to go. That combination, a nightly cliffhanger that will not let you stop, plus a distant, honored completion that keeps pulling, is precisely the architecture of every habit that actually sticks. Small daily hook, large, meaningful payoff. The Jews system had it centuries before anyone wrote a book about habits. So the hidden logic is behavioral. The division is not organized around what the text says. It is organized around what the reader does. It is built to be equal, so you never fall behind. It is built to cut mid-story, so you always come back. Together, those two features do one thing with ruthless efficiency. They get the entire Quran read, from beginning to end, inside 30 days, by a normal human being with a normal amount of willpower. The Jews is a completion device disguised as a table of contents. And once you understand that the system is behavioral, the specific parts everyone knows suddenly make sense in a new way. Let us look at the landmarks. 2 of the 30 parts have famous names, and both names come from the same simple source, the first word of the part. The 29th Jews is called Jews Tabarak. It opens with Surah Al-Mulk, and Al-Mulk begins with the word Tabaraka. Blessed is he in whose hand is the dominion. So the whole part takes its name from that first word, Tabarak. And Al-Mulk is worth pausing on, because its own reputation fits the pacing story perfectly. It is a surah many Muslims recite every night before sleep, 30 ayat, short enough to hold in the mouth easily, and there is a well-known narration describing it as a surah that intercedes for the one who reads it until they are forgiven. It is exactly the kind of surah that sits in the fast, memorable, oft-recited back third of the book, brief, self-contained, easy to return to nightly. It is the front edge of the acceleration, the point where the chapters have shrunk enough that a person can fold one into their daily routine without effort. And the 30th Jews, the last one, the most famous of all, is called Jews Amma. It opens with Surah An-Naba, and An-Naba begins Amma Yatasa Alun, about what are they asking one another. The first word is Amma, and so the entire final part of the Quran is known, everywhere in the Muslim world, as Jews Amma. Now, why is Jews Amma the one every single person knows? Why is it the part children start with, the part printed on its own in little booklets, the part almost every Muslim has memorized, even if they have memorized nothing else? On the surface, because it is at the end, and it is full of short surahs, and short surahs are easier. But look closer. because there is something remarkable buried in that part, and it is the key to the entire map. Hold that thought, because to see it, we finally have to look at the shape of the whole thing. Here is the map. This is the structure you were never shown. I went through the 30 parts and counted, for each one, how many surahs it contains. Not how long it is, they are all about the same length, remember, but how many separate chapters fall inside each part. And the result is one of the most beautiful things in the entire architecture of the book, because it is not flat, it climbs. At the front of the Quran, each juz holds almost nothing by count. The first juz contains Al-Fatiha and part of one enormous surah. The second juz is entirely inside a single surah, Al-Baqarah, start to finish, one chapter, that whole portion. The third juz spans just 2 surahs. For the entire first stretch of the book, a juz holds 1 surah, or 2. The chapters are so long that a full day's reading barely gets you through 1 or 2 of them. Then, as you move through the book, the count starts to rise, and I want to actually walk you up the curve, because the shape of it is the whole argument. Through the first 10 parts, you are almost always looking at 1 or 2 surahs per juz. Around the middle of the book, it ticks up to 2 and 3. By the 21st juz, you are holding 5 surahs in a single part. The 22nd holds 4. The 25th, 5 again, and then the climb steepens fast. The 26th juz holds 6 surahs. The 27th holds 7. The 28th holds 9. The 29th, juz Tabarak, holds 11 surahs in one part. Watch the sequence as pure numbers. 1, 1, 2 at the front. Then 2, 3, 3 through the middle. Then 5, 4, 4, 5 as it starts to lift. Then 6, 7, 9, 11 as it accelerates. It is not a straight line, it is a curve, bending upward, getting steeper the closer you get to the back of the book. Each of those parts is the same length as the first juz that held barely a single surah. But the chapters inside them are collapsing in size, so the count keeps climbing, faster and faster. And then the 30th, Juz Amma. Juz Amma contains 37 surahs. Stop. Read that again. 37. The final juz, which is the same length as all the others, roughly the same quantity of text, contains 37 separate chapters of the Quran, out of 114 total, which means that the last single part of the Quran, 1 part out of 30, contains almost a third of all the chapters in the entire book. A third of the surahs of the Quran are packed into the final 30th of its length. That is the map. That is the shape nobody draws for you. The surahs are front-loaded by length. The gigantic chapters sit at the beginning, so a whole day's reading is 1 or 2 of them. And the tiny chapters swarm at the end, so a single day's reading at the back sweeps up 37 of them at once. The book is wide and slow at the front, and narrow and fast at the back. It is a funnel. And now put that together with everything else we have found, because this is the payoff. What does that shape do to the experience of reading? Think about it as a journey through 30 days. For the first week, you are grinding through the massive surahs, 1 or 2 per day, the same long, dense, demanding chapters, and it feels like slow, heavy work, because it is. Al-Baqarah alone eats more than 2 entire days. You are moving through deep, sustained, difficult terrain, and there is a reason that is the right place to put the hard part. Think about any 30-day commitment you have ever made. When is the resolve strongest? At the start. Day 1, day 2, day 3, you are fresh, motivated, the intention is new and bright. And when is it weakest? When are you most likely to quit? Somewhere in the exhausted middle, and again near the end, when fatigue has set in and the finish still feels far. Now look at what the Quran does. It puts its heaviest, most demanding reading in the exact window where your willpower is highest, the first days, when you can bear the weight. Al-Baqarah, the longest and one of the most legally dense surahs in the book, lands on days 1, 2, and 3, precisely when a reader has the most fuel in the tank. But as you go, the pace quietly changes. The surahs get shorter, the count per day starts to rise. And by the time you reach the final stretch, you are moving fast, part after part, sweeping up more and more chapters, the rhythm accelerating, more surahs, more beginnings, more endings, until the very last night, when you tear through 37 surahs in a single sitting and burst across the finish line. The reading experience accelerates toward the end, on purpose. The book is paced like a race that speeds up as you approach the tape, so that the reader who is grinding on day 3 is flying on day 30. The structure is designed so that the moment you are most tired, most likely to quit, the deep water is already behind you and the current is carrying you home. The hardest part is front-loaded, while your resolve is fresh. The easy, fast, exhilarating part is saved for the end, when you need momentum most. It is the exact opposite of how most people would build it, and it is exactly how you should build it if your real goal is to get a normal, tiring, distractible human being all the way to the last page. That is not an accident of where the long surahs happen to be. Remember, the order of the surahs was itself fixed and deliberate, roughly longest to shortest. And the 30-part grid was laid down on top of that descending order, and the two of them together produce a reading curve that starts heavy and ends light, that starts slow and ends fast, that carries a human being through the most demanding book they will ever read and releases them, accelerating, into completion. So look at what the Juz actually is now, with everything in view. It is not a table of contents. It never was. It is a pacing engine. It has 3 settings, and they all work together. It is equal in size, so you never fall behind. It cuts mid-story, so you always come back. And it is mapped onto a book that funnels from long to short, so the ride accelerates and delivers you, at speed, to the end. Every single feature is about the reader, not the text. The equal portions are about the reader's schedule. The mid-story cuts are about the reader's return. The accelerating curve is about the reader's morale. The whole 30-part system is a piece of behavioral design, centuries old, engineered to take a normal person and get the entire Quran through them, cover to cover, in 30 days, and to make them want to keep going the whole way. And here is what I find genuinely moving about it, now that the whole thing is visible. This system does not assume you are a scholar. It does not assume you are disciplined, or gifted, or already devoted. It assumes the opposite. It assumes you are a normal human being with a limited supply of willpower, who is capable of starting something and not finishing it, who gets tired around the middle and tempted to quit near the end. It was built by people who understood that about us and loved us anyway. And instead of demanding that we be better than we are, they built a structure that works with exactly who we are. Equal steps for the part of us that falls behind. Cliffhangers for the part of us that wanders off. Acceleration for the part of us that runs out of strength near the finish. It is a scaffolding built around human weakness, so that human weakness does not get to have the final word on whether we finish the book. And now, finally, look back at Juz Amma and see it for what it is. The part every child begins with. 37 short surahs, the ones you memorize first, the ones you recite in prayer, the dense, bright, fast-moving final 30th of the book. It is placed at the end of the reading journey and at the beginning of the memorizing journey, and that is not a contradiction. It is the same design serving the same person twice. When you read the Quran through in a month, Juz Amma is the sprint at the finish. When you begin to memorize the Quran as a child, Juz Amma is the on-ramp. 37 small victories stacked at the shallow end, each one short enough to finish, so that the very first thing a child ever experiences of the Quran is the feeling of completing surah after surah after surah. The same funnel that speeds up the reader at the end speeds up the beginner at the start. The structure gives the tired adult momentum toward the finish and gives the small child momentum away from the start line, using the exact same 37 surahs from the exact same part. One piece of design, 2 travelers, both carried. That is the Juz. Not a chunk, not a chapter, not a table of contents. A pacing engine, hiding in plain sight in a book you thought you already understood, running quietly underneath every Ramadan and every child's first memorization, doing the one thing it was built to do, getting you to the end. If this changed how you will pick up the Quran this Ramadan, do 2 things before you go. Leave a comment and tell me which piece did it, whether it was the 21 cuts that fall mid-story, or the funnel from 1 surah a day to 37, or the fact that the hardest reading is front-loaded while your resolve is fresh, because the ones you write genuinely reach the person who needed them. And subscribe, because we are building this thing one piece at a time, and there is more coming. May Allah make us people who begin the book and finish it, who are carried by its rhythm instead of defeated by its weight, and who arrive at the last night of the month with the whole of it behind us and its light still moving in us. May He let us be among those who complete what they start with Him, one part at a time, one day at a time, all the way to the end. 30 parts, 30 days. It was always a map for getting you home. Now you can see it. Open it tomorrow and let it carry you.